Welcome to My Safety Training Online presents Basic Tree Felling. This presentation is not intended to make you a professional tree feller, but it is intended to make you aware of improper cutting techniques. It does not take into account the many different factors that can go into felling a tree, so please research further at OSHA.gov. What will you learn as a result of taking this presentation? We'll discuss tree felling hazards by defining them, the controls on tree felling hazards, the basic parts to tree felling, the definition of tree felling terms, pre-job planning, and best tree felling techniques. In part 1, we'll discuss tree felling definitions. So let's get started. The first definition we'll look at is the undercut. This should be 1/4 to 1/4 of the tree's diameter. The two cuts meet at the apex of the angle, and neither cut bypasses the other. The Dutchman cut is a cut which acts like a splitting wedge. Back cuts are designed to release the wood that holds the tree from falling over the undercut. The sloping cut is a cut which a tree can fall in either direction and allows no margin of safety for the cutter. The purpose of the hinge is to provide a sufficient wood to hold the tree to the stump during the majority of the tree's fall and to guide the tree's fall in the intended direction. The barber chair is instead of the tree leaving the front of the stump, part of the tree can come off the back of the stump toward the cutter. Part 2, tree felling methods and their hazards. Pre-cut planning. Before you start cutting, determine the direction you want the tree to fall. Look for overhead hazards such as dead limbs or tops, loose bark, power lines, etc. Make sure the entire area is clear of falling hazards. Plan and clear your escape route. Check for wind conditions. The wind can cause a tree to fall prematurely in either direction. Make sure no one else is in the cutting area. Before you start cutting, make sure you have all your required personal protective equipment. Head, eye, leg, ear protection. Make sure your saw has been inspected and is in good working order. A professional cutter can normally look at a stump of a tree and tell how well the basic cutting rules were followed. We're going to go into that so that you'll be trained as well. It's like a crime scene investigator or a forensic expert who can look at a scene and determine the facts. The same goes for stumps, and what professionals call it stump forensics. Before you cut, remember, in order to look at a stump and tell how well it was cut, first you need to know some of the basic mechanics of tree felling. So let's get into them. Part 3, basic methods of successfully and safely cutting a tree. The three basic parts to tree felling are the undercut, the back cut, and holding wood or hinge cut. The three steps to cutting are: the undercut should be at least 1/3 to 1/4 of the tree's diameter. The two cuts will meet at the apex of the angle, and neither cut will bypass the other. As you can see in the particular diagram and picture, don't let the cut bypass the apex. Step 2, the Dutchman cut equals death. One of the most common causes of the barber chair is a Dutchman. A heavy leaner is the other major cause. The BC standard says that a shelf over 1/30 of an inch is unacceptable. As you can see, the shelf of a wood is called a Dutchman. How not to make a cut. Let's listen to this little twerp because he does know what he's talking about. This photo shows a bypass. The straight cut went way past the apex of the angle, and the results of this cut leave a Dutchman. How not to make a cut, part 2. The undercut of this tree went way too deep, and the tree went over backwards. Yes, a professional tree cutter can look at this stump and determine that the guy who made this cut had an immediate opening. His. This photo shows a barber chair, which could very well be your last cut. Instead of the tree leaving the front of the stump, part of the tree can come off the back of the stump towards the cutter. Here we can see some examples of trees which were improperly cut and the end result of that improper cutting. So check these out real good before you do any cutting yourself. No undercut has the same effect as an improper cut. You have no control over where the tree is going to fall, and the tree more than likely will barber chair on you. Remember, any tree over 6 inches in diameter requires an undercut. Alright, looking at this picture, we're going to repeat ourselves a bit. This stump has no undercut, and notice that there is no hinge wood left on the stump. When a tree is cut like this, there's a high potential for a barber chair. Remember, a proper undercut is supposed to dictate the fall of the tree for the direction of the tree. Back cuts are designed to release the wood that holds the tree from falling over the undercut. Wedges are used to prevent the tree from sitting back on the saw blade. As you can see, the 1/4 to 1/3 inch tree diameter. When a back cut is too low, the tree can kick off the back of the stump. Notice the hinge wood is insufficient and the undercut is too deep. A sloping cut. A tree can slip off the stump and fall in any direction when looking at these pictures depicted of a sloping cut. One side of the hinge wood was cut off, causing this tree to fall 90 degrees off its intended direction of fall. A fatality resulted from this improper cut. Here we can see where the undercut was too deep and the back cut was too low. Notice that one side of the hinge wood is cut off, and this tree also did not fall in its intended direction. Yes, anyone can cut down a tree if they cut on it long enough, but doing it safely means following proper procedures. Proper cuts. The purpose of the hinge is to provide sufficient wood to hold the tree to the stump during the majority of the tree's fall and to guide the tree's fall in the intended direction. Components of a hinge cut. The length of the hinge should be 80% of the diameter of the stump. For example, a 12-inch diameter tree should be 9.6 inches long. You got 12 inches times 0.8. The width of the hinge should be 10% of the diameter of the tree stump. For example, a 12-inch diameter tree, the hinge should be 1.2 inches long. 12 inches times 0.1. The hinge on a tree with no side lean should be perpendicular to the rest of the tree. Here we can see some examples of the hinge cut in pictures using the correct methodology. Thanks for participating from My Safety Training Online, and hope we made the cut for you.